This evening, only the guest speakers will be videotaped. On behalf of Father Paul Robson, our parish priest, Holy Cross Parish, and Christian Life Community, it is an honor to welcome everyone from our community and visitors from around the island. We are very happy that you are here for an exciting evening with our guest speaker, Father John McCarthy. Scientist and Jesuit priest, Father John McCarthy has written a few books, and one of the books is Do Monkeys Go to Heaven? It would be an interesting read, and he has two other books too as well. At age 25, he joined the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, for training through the priesthood. He is well educated with PhD in boreal forest ecology, master's in soil science, and Bachelor of Science in forestry biology. He is a lichen specialist and has named several species of lichen new to science. One lichen species is named in his honor, Acrospora, McCarthy I. Father John will be speaking on the message of planetary hope. Pope Francis, who is really concerned about protecting the earth, our common home, and to bring the whole human family together to seek sustainable and integral development. We have hope that things can change. Pope Francis calls us to be in union with God, with others, with all creatures. The Spirit dwells in every creature. Our own ancestors were stewards of Mother Earth. They lived this on a daily basis, offering tobacco when they prayed and picked medicines. They respected the earth, water, air, and fire, and all creatures. Jimmy Wedge. And here's Father John.
Well, thank you everyone, and thank you both for that generous introduction. And welcome everyone to Holy Cross Church, Holy Cross Mission here in Wiikwemkoong, Manitoulin Island. I currently live in Sudbury at Villa Leola, the Jesuit Retreat Center and Conference Center on Long Lake. I finally have lakefront living, so I just got admission there just this past year from Toronto. I've been in Toronto for the last 7 years. So tonight, first of all, I'd just like to begin with this story. When I was young, not too long ago, after we used to go to family mass in the morning at our parish in Newfoundland, from St. John's, Newfoundland. You probably can figure that out from the accent. But we used to go to early mass, walk over to mass with my parents and siblings and myself. And then when we come back, we'd always have a big breakfast after Sunday morning mass. The berries that my parents had picked during the fall, bacon and eggs, or whatever it may be. And I would always go and fish for trout, brook trout, in a small stream not too far from my house. And so I just couldn't wait to get home from mass and go, because I knew where to go. I knew the pools to go, and I would catch a few trout, maybe 3 or 4 trout, bring them back home. And I remember so well the delight at my parents when they saw the lovely trout. My dad would clean them, and we'd have them for breakfast. So those are a real early memory of my life with family and with trout, brook trout. One day after mass, I went anticipating my favorite pool on the river, and I got to the stream, and the stream was no more. The stream was gone. It was only a small stream, but it flowed behind a future subdivision, not too far from where I lived. And so the week before, someone had taken a bulldozer and went down through the center of the stream, and the stream was no more. Where the trout had gone, I had no idea. And I just remember that so well. I was 5 or 6. And for me, that's a real image of what Pope Francis talks about in terms of integral or holistic ecology. In other words, things were broken. You know, the anticipation of catching the trout, the joy of bringing the trout back to my parents, seeing their joy, the taste of fresh brook trout for breakfast with homemade Parkersbury jam and toast and bacon and eggs. And so it was all one ensemble. It was a unity, it was holistic, it brought us together as a family, there was a relationship with trout in the stream, and that was broken in a way. And I could not put it back together again. I could not go back and restore that stream. It was impossible. And so something was broken, and we know ourselves that when, by our own actions today, there are many things that are broken. You know, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, and Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So we realized, so tonight, with the help of Pope Francis and Laudato Si, which is, I don't know if you ever had a chance to read it, it's 5 years old now. Laudato Si, praise be you, my Lord. That's all the encyclicals of the popes are always take the first couple of words, and often in Latin, the official text. So Laudato Si, praise be to you, Lord God, for all that you have made. And so it's 5 years old now. We just finished the Synod on the Amazon just a few months ago, where Pope Francis took a biome of the world, the Amazon forest, and really kind of looked at that from a church point of view as well. So I'd like to use this tonight, but look at it in a whole different way. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off with a video. I'm going to run the video once. It's about 2 or 3 minutes long. You may recognize it actually, if you've flown in the past couple of years. And then I'll have a little few words on it, and then I'll do it again. And then we move into have a PowerPoint presentation, and then maybe some discussion afterwards. So I'll start off with the video, if I can get that going there.
Throughout this land, for thousands of years, it's been said that everything has a spirit. Not surprisingly, it's where you might find your own. Newfoundland and Labrador.
Has anybody seen this ad? I'm going to play it again after. Just a few words on it for those who haven't. It's from the Torngat Mountains National Park in northern Labrador. Torngat is the god of the Northland for the Inuit of northern Labrador. So this park is managed by the Inuit of Nunatsiavut in northern Labrador and the Inuit of Nunavut in northern Quebec. So they kind of work together. And I had the privilege a number of years ago, which I'll talk a bit about later, to spend 2 weeks in the Tornets. So throughout this land for thousands of years, it has been said that everything has a spirit. Funny thing, it's where you may find your own. So I'm just going to do it once more, and then we'll read this.
Throughout this land for thousands of years, it's been said that everything has a spirit. Not surprisingly, it's where you might find your own. Newfoundland and Labrador.
So the whole question for Pope Francis, what he calls integral ecology, probably a better word is holistic ecology. We often think of ecology from a scientific point of view, but the Pope really wants to look at culture, our spirituality, our religion, our science, our economics, our politics, how all of this in some way can work together so that we can find a common home, so that we can take care of our common home. Throughout this land for thousands of years, it has been said that everything has a spirit. Not surprisingly, it's where you may find your own. These ads are brilliant. They cost millions of dollars, and they work. More and more people are coming to Newfoundland every year because of these ads. You get on the plane, I think this is some of the first ads you'll see. And so really tonight, I'd really like to kind of focus on the notion of that we are saved in and through the created world, that nature is salvific for us. It's not simply the backdrop to what we do, but somehow it's intrinsic to our own salvation. I use that kind of in a Christian term, or whatever it may be, whatever faith tradition we may have. There's something about creation that gives us life, and therefore we call it sacred, that which gives us life. And so I'd like to talk a bit about what I'm going to call a contemplative ecology. I don't know if you know this image. It's from David Blackwood. He's a famous Newfoundland artist. Sorry, my computer. And the density of ice is a little bit less than 1 gram per cubic centimeter. Right? And so the density of salt water is a little over a gram per cubic centimeter, 1.026 grams per cubic centimeter. So therefore, you put an ice cube in salt water, about 90% of the ice will be underwater on the ice cube. So in this case, 90% of icebergs generally are underwater. We have a lot of icebergs in Newfoundland. Come in May and June, and you'll have a great feast with the icebergs. This is the most provocative image. The humpback whale. The men here, their ship, there's nothing worse than being on the Labrador coast your ship is on fire and you're in a small boat in the frigid Arctic waters off the Labrador coast. You're about almost to die, and yet below you lives life, the great behemoths of the world, the humpback whales. So there's something about a depth. I think often we need a depth in our language when we talk about creation and we talk about nature. And that's what I'd like to propose tonight. What kind of language can we have? A language of depth that we can use when we talk about the created world. And Pope Francis tries to do that in Laudato Si. We often have, I think, what I would call a poverty of discourse when we talk about the created world. Why do we value nature? Often we think of nature solely in economic or resource-based terms. It's very important, obviously. I live in Sudbury. It's a major resource center for mining in the north. And of course, they're looking now at the Ring of Fire in northern Ontario. So nature provides us with a lot. We could not live without the water, the soil, the air, the forest, the land, and nature. So it gives us so much. And it's foundation to our economy, and it hopefully makes us to be a healthy people. But often what happens is that we only value that which we can economize. In other words, we put a value to, and often an empirical value, like a dollar sign. If we can't put a dollar sign to it, then often we don't value it, and it's left to the wayside. So we've kind of barcoded nature, and unless it provides a service to us that we can give a value to, we often say we don't value. There are some things that money can't buy, but in the end, of course, it's MasterCard or Visa, if you prefer. So this is how often we will see nature. We kind of give it a dollar value, and if it doesn't have that, well then, we don't spend much time with it. And so what can happen is that in our current world, and Pope Francis is quite strong on this, we're losing so much. There's a real sense of loss in the world. The loss of creatures, the biodiversity. We lose our goods and services. People talk of pesticides and the influence on bees, and bees pollinate all our plants. So if we had to spend the money to pollinate the plants ourselves, as the bees already do, the impact it would have on us. But in the end, what's most important, I think, is a real loss of meaning in our world as we strip our nature bare. The Valley, Canada, it's bought out Inco, so Valley owns the mine in Sudbury, and this is Valley's mine in northern Labrador. It's a nickel mine, major deposit of nickel in northern Labrador. There was a discussion at one point. This nickel from northern Labrador is processed in Newfoundland, and so Valley has a major hydrometallurgy processing facility near St. John's, and it produces a lot of waste, as we know from Sudbury. There's a lot of waste produced in the processing of nickel ore. And so they needed a place where they could put the waste. So they decided to take a 50-hectare lake in Newfoundland, drain it, line it, and then use that as the waste receptacle. And they could only do this with the change in the Fisheries Act. You couldn't do it like 20, 30 years ago. But with the change in the Fisheries Act in Canada, we can now do this with our water bodies. And I went to a meeting once, and this is a quote from the Environment Minister about that. And she said, "Don't let emotion get in the way. Science has shown that there's nothing about which to be concerned by taking the lake, draining it, and making it become a receptacle for the waste. Because you got to put the waste somewhere. So therefore, this is what they decided to do." But notice what she said. She said, "Don't let emotion get in the way." Well, how else do we make decisions? Except through our emotions. Emotions are rational. Emotions are reasonable. And so it was very interesting that she used this then to kind of counter any kind of voice that said, we don't want to do this because we love the lake or because how important it is to have this freshwater body close to town. So we get into this kind of real, what I call like a poverty of discourse. We focus on scientific knowledge, the intellect, human reason, and culture of science, and we forget, or at least we put off into the private world, the language of wisdom, imagination, emotion, and the culture of faith. We need both when we talk about the created world, when we talk about nature. But often we tend to focus on this side. This is what counts. For example, the whole Ring of Fire and the chromite deposit in Northern Ontario, I don't know if you follow the news, but they're looking at processing or developing this, but you got to put a lot of roads in, of course. And the only discussion in the papers around the internet is all related to this. How much we will get, what will be the value of the chromite, how many jobs are produced. All this is very important, obviously. But there's very little discussion on what we need to do and what we could lose in the process. So we need some kind of, I would say, and the Pope I think is strong on this, we need a contemplative language or discourse when we talk about the created world. This is a quote from Pope Francis. If we approach nature without an openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in a relationship to the natural world, then we can easily slip into being a master, a consumer, or an exploiter. But if we feel an intimacy with that, then that flows a sobriety and a care that will well up within us, as Laudato Si in just chapter 11. So he's asking for a whole different language when we talk about creation, when we talk about nature. The language of awe, the language of beauty. And so he focuses on the world is not a problem to be solved, but it's a joyful mystery to be entered into. And mystery, not in the sense of it's unknown, we can figure it out, but a mystery in a sense of beauty and wonder, What does it mean to love another person? What does it mean to love your family? There's a real deep mystery, abiding mystery to that. And we approach it with great care and great respect in many ways. So this is how he talks about this integral ecology. This kind of holistic ecology. So then we're really thrust into a whole different language. Wonder, delight, awe, beauty, joy, sacred care, contemplation, reverence. We normally associate this language with religion, with church. But really, it's a language that should be in the common discourse when we talk about the environment. And out of this, really, the foundation of all of this is love. And we will only protect that which we love. You may wonder why this is here. Why is that fire burning in your backyard? When we talk of nature, we often focus on the economic, the scientific. But there are many different layers to our world, our reality. Why is that fire burning in your backyard? The fire is burning in my backyard because the covalent bonds formed 200 years ago in photosynthesis are now being broken, and the energy between the hydrogen and oxygen atoms are given off in the form of flame and smoke. That's why fire is burning in my backyard. So it's kind of this scientific, very important language, very important discourse. But it's not the only one. Why is that fire burning in your backyard? That fire is burning in my backyard because I put a match to it. Kind of cause and effect. Why is that fire burning in your backyard? There's a fire in my backyard because my family and I are having a birthday party for my 1-year-old son. All responses are true, and yet they're all at different kind of levels. One is not necessarily truer than the other, but often we just focus on this part. The kind of the scientific, the economic, the financial, the power politics of it all. We don't get into this much more fundamental contemplative language. Pope Francis is really strong on the notion that nature is a word. In other words, it's a verb. Nature speaks to us. It's simply given. We cannot create a forest. We cannot create the atmosphere. We cannot create the oceans. We cannot create our backyard in a way. It's simply given. It's wild, it's strange, it's incomprehensible, it's mysterious. It's simply given. As we would say in the Christian tradition, it's given from the Creator, and it's given for the beauty and the goodness of life. And so I think ultimately, we need a world and a place that's not of our own making. And much of our world is of our own making. We now use the word Anthropocene it hasn't been defined officially yet, but it's been finally defined as the new geological age. In other words, we have impacted so strongly our environment that it now has millions of years from now, it will see the impact and the imprint of human activity. But I think we do need something that is not of our making, not of our projects, or of our engineering, or of our control. And so we need to, in many ways, people talk now, we need to mourn what is lost. And this is where I come back to the brook trout. I don't know if anybody has read this book by Cormac McCarthy. He's not related, which he was, but it's called The Road. Anybody read The Road by any chance? It won a Pulitzer Prize, and he's an American writer, a famous American writer, and it's turned into a film as well. I'd just like to read the first line here, first two lines. Nights dark beyond darkness, and the days more grey, each one that had gone before. Like the onset of some cold glaucoma dimming away the world. That's how it starts, and that's how it continues for 300 pages. It's dark, ash, humans have become cannibals. It's a post-apocalyptic world. We don't know what the apocalypse is. And there's a son and a father traveling this world that is now controlled by humans that have been turned into cannibals. That's the only way they can survive. And I loved it, I must say. I love the darkness of it all. But anyway, at the end, there's one paragraph in 241 pages where he uses color. And this is what he says. These are the last lines. I got a few of them here. Once there were brook trout in the streams in the mountains. You could see them standing in the amber current where the white edges of their fins wimple softly in the flow. You see the white edges there. They smelled of moss in your hand. I know what that smells like. I don't know if anybody did any brook trout fishing. Polished and muscular and torsional. On their backs were vermiculate patterns that were maps of the world in its becoming. Maps and mazes. Of a thing which could not be put back together again. Not be made right again. In the deep lands where they lived, all things were older than man, and they hummed of mystery. So they couldn't put it back together again. Of a thing which could not be put back together, not be made right again. So in many parts of the world now, humans are coming to realize that there's a real desire to somehow lament the loss of something that will never come back again. Whether it's extinction of species, whether it's the loss of my little bubbling brook, about 40, longer than that, 55 years ago or more. So there's a grief in many ways, and associated with that is anger as well. Anger, frustration, grief. Your water source becomes polluted, and you can't get it right again. So you set up a contract with Culligan's, and he brings in bottled water for the rest of your life. For example, I'm using all the examples from Newfoundland, where I know it the best, but this is the Churchill River in eastern Labrador. It's the mighty Churchill. And this is what it looks like now. So there's the Muskrat, this is called Muskrat Falls. And now this is the dam on Muskrat Falls. It was just developed this past year. And it was $20 billion over budget, but that's another thing. But anyway. So what will happen now, the Innu in the area, the Skapi Montagnier people, called now the Innu, they were protesting for a long time on this, to no avail. Their voices were small, their voices had no impact. But now, once the reservoir goes in, and in all cases in the boreal forest, once you put a reservoir and a major river system, you're going to get mercury accumulation in the system. And so even if the mercury is low, even if they can still eat fish, these signs will go up. And so what was once a land and waters that gave life now becomes a possible source of disease, a possible source of ill health, a possible source of sickness. So the land becomes, and the waters become transformed from life-giving into possible death-giving. And the people, they're not going to go anywhere. They live there, and this now becomes their neighborhood. And so you can see that there's a real sense of loss here, despite all their efforts to no avail. You know, the government went ahead and deemed that this project is a greater benefit to society than not doing it, for example. So we can end up with a broken heart because of a broken world. And the broken world and the broken heart. And yet, as the title was given to me, in times of planetary crisis, we have hope. And we must have hope. So that's what I want to continue with. All creatures, great and small. You may recognize this, the Garden of Eden. Many different depictions. And of course, you're not going to find the Garden of Eden. This is a real mythic understanding. But throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, humans have always understood themselves in union with all other creatures. It's just been that way, you know? And so right from the Genesis, when this was written thousands of years ago, we had this sense of this kind of idyllic world, which never really existed, of course, but that humans are always in intimacy with the created world. If you recognize this, Noah's Ark. So again, the same kind of notion. There was an Austrian Jesuit, actually, in the 17th century. He tried to figure out, according to Scripture, what Noah's Ark could look like, and where you would put the lions away from the giraffes, etc., etc. You know. But anyway, again, another kind of mythic or understanding that we're all saved together. You know, after the great flood, again, that the Scripture talks about, everything comes together 2 by 2. So all of creation is saved together with humans. It's not simply humanity and then leave the rest of the world. All of it somehow comes together. But all of creation is somehow with Christ, and Christ is with all of creation. Again, nothing is left out. Everything stays together. So whether it's Noah's Ark, or whether it's the Garden of Eden, or whether it's the Tree of Life, all of creation and humanity are in it together. And Charles Darwin, a little bit of Darwin here. Charles Darwin, if you haven't read this one, The Origin of Species, it's one of the great masterpieces of the world, obviously, because Darwin really opened up a whole world of understanding that we never had before. You know, Jesus Christ didn't understand what Darwin came to know. It was just an amazing sense. At the end of the book, in this particular edition, 649 pages, published in 1859, he says, he talks about evolution. These are the last words. There is grandeur in this view of life, having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wondrous have been and are being evolved. And so it's an amazing insight that Darwin had, that all of life has a history, and that we're all related. We're all connected in a very intimate way. And of course, science has shown us that today. There's only 1.2% difference in my genome and my friend here. Now, there's a lot goes on in the rest of that genome. But we're related, obviously. The chimpanzee, the gorilla, the orangutans, and ourselves all have a common ancestor. We didn't evolve from the chimpanzee, but the chimpanzee and ourselves evolved from a common origin. In other words, related. Have you ever fallen on your tailbone? It hurts. We don't need it anymore because we're upright. And so we've lost our tail, so to speak. But the monkeys and the orangutans have kept theirs. So, in other words, even today, with our science, our study of the DNA, the RNA, the genomics, we're getting to see that we're quite connected quite a lot, obviously. Forest as a myth and as a memory. Most of my studies have been in forestry ecology over the years. And forest comes from a Latin word which means outside. In other words, the forest was outside the realm of governance in the Roman Empire. That famous Robin Hood and his band of merry men in the forest of what forest did they live in? Sherwood, thank you, Sherwood. They were outside the law. They were in the forest, and in the forest there was no law. So they were the outlaws. So you get this, I think that's where the term comes from. So the forest in our imagination has always been that which is outside control of human activity, juridical, economic, whatever it may be. So Robin Hood would live outside the law in this forest. But more and more, the outside is now being breached in a way, and it becomes the inside. In other words, I think in Canada, at least for me, I don't know about you, but we have this wonderful notion of the north. The Lucas land. In other words, there's a place to go where it seems you can go forever, even though Russia is just on the other side. But there's a sense of the great north. That's our myth. That's our Canadian myth in many ways. And for me, it's strong. It's like I need a place where I can go that I'm kind of outside. Maybe that's just me. I don't know about you, but there's something about being outside this norm, And so the forest can then be breached, and it becomes our project. Forestry, mining, hydro development, whatever it may be, all these various activities that we have. And so in the Amazon, for example, they just finished a synod on the Amazon, coming out of Ecology, where the church looked at the Amazon forest as a forest and its peoples and the Amazon River. And they asked the question, what does integral ecology look like, or could look like, in the Amazon forest, in the Amazon region? And maybe we can ask the same question, what does integral ecology look like, or could look like, on Manitoulin Island, or in Wiikwemkoong, on the reserve? What does it look like in Georgian Bay? What does it look like in the boreal region of Canada? So the church can ask these questions now in a more provocative way than we could before. And so this is an old soybean plantation. The tropical forest is cut. And so, our boundaries are no longer, there's no longer much more out there anymore. And so, one could say, if there's no outside for humans, then something happens to our inside as well. There's no place in the inside in which to dwell. I don't know if that makes any sense. But for me, we're always seeking habitat, and rightly so, for grizzly bears and for woodland caribou in northern Ontario. But we also need a place of asylum for the human spirit as well. We also need a place to go and to be. Like, you could ask yourself, where do you go? Where do you find that you're at home? Where do you find a sense of peace? Is there a place on the island? Is there a place in your backyard? In other words, we need a place in which to go to be at home and to be restful. And so grizzly bears, woodland caribou, and Atlantic salmon, whatever it may be, need a home as well. And so how to find all that? It's not an easy thing. Again, kind of the same notion we talked about earlier. The Torngat Mountains National Park is here. You saw the video. We're right here. So, and as I said at the beginning, I was privileged a couple of years ago at the invitation of Parks Canada to spend 2 weeks in Torngat Mountains National Park. And as soon as we arrived there, we saw a polar bear with her 2 cubs at a distance, at a healthy distance, of course. It was but there's something quite spectacular about this land of the Torngat, this land of the god Torngat, in which everything seems to have a spirit. And so the land is immense. I just was quite taken that this land, I thought, could gobble me up. This land could take me over within a second, and I would be erased from the memory of the earth. It was just so powerful. And yet, at the same time, it's a lived landscape. People have lived here for a long period of time and still do. And so with our guide, when he took us around, he said to us, there was the first time I shot my first caribou as a young teenager. Or there was where I used to pick berries with my grandparents. Or there we used to fish for Arctic char. And yet for me, as we went around, it was all like a wilderness landscape. And yet for him, it was it was a homeland, Benassi. So there's something about the landscape in which we live that gives us life. And so the landscape becomes an inscape for many of us. I just have a few examples of that. Say the Tickles. I used to work a lot for the Newfoundland government to no success whatsoever to try to protect areas of Newfoundland for futures, protected areas, wilderness areas. And we were invited by a group of people in northern Newfoundland because they wanted to say what they call the Tickles. It was an area of forest that was being open for commercial forestry. And they thought, no, we wanted to save it because for some reason it was so important for them. The landscape had become their inscape, and they couldn't escape that. Sorry for all the escapes, but anyway. So they took us on a tour to show, so we can make representation for the Newfoundland government. And there's a beautiful dog that accompanied us along the way. There's another example that comes from my father. Mine was my dad. He's 87 years old now, and he's been a great fisherman all his life. Fished for trout, for Atlantic salmon. And he can't do this anymore. He uses a cane now, but still in good health for 87 years old. But every year, on this particular river, this particular bend in the river called Connet River, it flows through a lush forest, the spruce and fir, or boggy swamp, and lots of lichens on the trees. And every year, he goes to the bend in this river to fish for salmon. Every year, the salmon come up the river. And so the salmon that are born in this river come back to the same river. They leave and go up to Greenland in the North Atlantic and they find their way back. Apparently they smell their way back to the same river. So each river has its own smell, has its own odor. And so my dad always came back to this river. What is it about that? You could say he loves fishing. He loves trouting, which he does. It's his cathedral. Actually, the largest trouting caught was on Good Friday. The rest of us were in the church and he was out on the river. A 19.5-pound C1 brown trout. And so he and the salmon, in a sense, became one and the same. The salmon found the same pool each year. My father would go to the same pool each year. And he would catch a salmon. Sure, he would kill this one salmon. But there was an intimacy and a relationship that grew over the years that I could see. And this became his cathedral. This became his church. This became where he found life. And so there's something about the natural world. It's hard to put a name to it, but it saves us. You know, so the landscape becomes an inscape within us, and it defines who we are as a person, as a people, as a community, and we just can't get rid of it. And yet often, what's the problem, I think, is that in today's world, to be able to speak of it is very difficult, because that kind of language is privatized. Don't be so emotional, the minister said. Don't be so emotional. Your parents died and you cried. Is that being emotional, or is that being quite reasonable? So, this language, this contemplative kind of, I would call it religious faith discourse, you know, this spiritual discourse is important, and we need to be able to kind of use that in the public realm as well as the financial and economic and scientific language. So my dad and these people in the Tickles, and maybe you here in people who live in Wiikwemkoong or other parts of the island, the land becomes somewhere. You know, it's subjective, it's bodily, you live in it, you sense it, you taste it, you hear it. It's not abstract, right? It's not nowhere, it's somewhere. And so, to be able to give words to this somewhere, I think is really important in our world today. And I think only because when the space becomes a place, you know, when this kind of forest or this island or this river becomes a place of the heart and of the mind, then care will emerge. But if it's simply $50 billion worth of chromite, care will never emerge, because it's simply $50 billion of chromite. It's not a place. Wendell Berry is a well-known American writer. He says, "Life is a Miracle" is the book, Essay Against Modern Superstition, which denies that life is a miracle. People exploit what they have already concluded to be of value, but they defend what they love. And to defend what we love, we need a language that's particular, that's rooted and incarnate. For we love what we know intimately, what we know particularly. And this is kind of a very important. This is a man who's a well-known writer, but he lived on a farm. He farmed all his life. He came to know intimately this farm in Kentucky where he lives. So again, going back, you know, we put names to creatures. As Rosemary pointed out, I've been lucky enough to put some names to lichens. They're beautiful. We'll talk about that later. But of course, the same with Michelangelo. You see it in the Sistine Chapel in Rome. Adam means Adama. Comes from the Hebrew word Adama, the Aramaic word Adama, which means earth. It's an earthling. Human, humus, humility. Humans come from the earth. And Eve is the mother of life, Gaia. So Adam and Eve basically represent for us life. And from them, that's why Michelangelo, he was a genius, right? There's Eve coming from Adam, and then Adam, the creation of Adam. And we say the same thing. And Adam then, what was his main work? His main work was, he was given the mandate to name all the creatures. When you think of it, it's the most amazing vocation to name the creature. When you name your son or your daughter, when you name your newborn child, you enter into a relationship with them. Without a name, the child will die. And so when we name something, we then enter into mutuality and we can then love. I don't know if you know this man, Carl Linnaeus, Swedish botanist. He gave every creature has a binomial. We're called Homo sapien, the wise one. Was when he talked about this Ecology from McCarthy S.J. So in other words, in the 1700s, he said, let's name every creature using two Latin words, a genus and a species. And so he's the beginning of the naming of the creatures from a scientific point of view. And so these are I don't know if they look pretty to you, but these are some of the lichens. It's a mutualistic combination of a fungus and an algae. Like when they come together, they form a whole different creature. And so I'm working with specialists around the world. I was quite privileged to be able to put a name to these three different creatures. We call this one Hymenalia parva. We named this one down here after Newfoundland, Biotora terranove, and this one Asperidia curiosa. It's all Greek to me, but so we've got to give a name. Before, no one knew what these were. But once you put a name to it, then you can enter into a relationship. It becomes a creature, a living thing. And this is Ecology from McCarthy. I know. It's not as good looking as a polar bear. It's not very sexy, it's not very cute, but really, it's just a blob on a rock. So Kerry Knudsen and his wife Jana Kokokana, he's American, she's Czech. So they named it, they described it. You're not supposed to name creatures after yourself, you can't do that. So they named it in my honor. I protested to no avail. But and they put their names go after the name, so they become the authority on that name. So anyway, there it is. And we also, with some colleagues in Spain and Finland, we named a lichen after St. Ignatius, and we call it Cladonia ignatia, St. Ignatius. And Cladonia is clad, the Greek for clad, so it basically branches. I found this in Guelph. In the backwoods of the property of the little house in Guelph. So we gave it a name, and it's a new species. It's a good species. There's one other creature in the world named after St. Ignatius. It's called Strychnos ignatia. And it's a source of strychnine that's used for poisoning people. So anyway. What's in a name? These names here, acorn, otter, dandelion, bluebell, beech, ivy, heron. A lot of these names are familiar to you. What do they have in common? These names all have one thing in common. They were taken out of the Oxford Junior Dictionary a few years ago. They're no longer in this dictionary that's useful for young teenagers. And the names were replaced with attachment, blog, voicemail, cut and paste, bullet point, chat room, etc., etc. So it's interesting that this dictionary now, the Oxford Junior Dictionary, have taken these other names out. So in other words, these creatures can become nameless in a way. And so now the young person looking up otter or heron in this dictionary won't find it, but they will find voicemail, they will find celebrity, etc., etc. So the question remains, is the only BlackBerry we come to know your BlackBerry? Or is the only Apple we will ever come to know is your Apple computer? In other words, names matter. Names are important. And we give names to creatures so that we can enter into relationship with them. So a final word, at least for the slides here. Let's see how the time goes. Nature is not only a source of scientific inquiry, it is indeed that. It has given me great pleasure and great joy over the years to study nature. Nature does not only give us goods and services, it does. Our metals, our paper, our water, innumerable things that we could never imagine. Nature is also a place of meaning, and it gives meaning to our lives, it gives meaning to our communities. So we live in kind of an integral world, a world of language, which means a world of relationships that we've kind of developed. So the contemplative ecology, in a way, it's not the final answer. It's not the silver bullet, but to be able to speak of the world with this kind of deeper language, I think is very important. Because right now, we kind of, it's like the iceberg in the water. We speak at the level of the 10%. We're not able to go deeper because society often won't accept that kind of language. They think it's too private, it's emotional, it's religious language, it's too hairy-fairy, whatever it may be. So we need something deep, and that's the key, I think. Because we experience nature with many different levels. Why is that fire burning in your backyard? There are many different ways to answer the question. Why is nature important to us as humans? There are many different ways to answer that question. But ultimately, we would hope the final answer is because it is what we love. And only when we love something, only when we love somebody, will we act to protect, or to care for, or to reverence. And so, Pope Francis, in his Laudato Si writing, he talks of an ecological conversion that's needed. And I'd like to speak a little bit about that just in the context of the Trinity, but we'll see how that goes. This, I don't know if you know, this is a Jesuit from the 19th century. Gerard Manley Hopkins. He was a great Victorian poet. And I'd just like to read to you God's grandeur, just quickly here. The world, he says, is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil, crushed. Why do men now not reck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared, betrayed, bleared, smeared with toil. And wears man's smudge and shears man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. But for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, O morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and bright wings. It's from the 19th century. Despite nature having been seared with our trade, and it wears our smudge, and it has our smell, he says, despite all this, nature is never spent. And I think that's the real hope, too, that we have, that nature, in the end, is never spent. So how then to live it in such a way in which we love nature and come to understand that nature then saves us in so many ways that we can at least understand. Let's see if I have it here. Do you have a favorite, do you have a favorite place where you go and where you find energy and where you find hope and rest and comfort? Does the natural world play a role like that for you? Or what struck you? What struck you among the slides here on the PowerPoint? Does anybody like to kind of share something about with their own story of the natural world that kind of gives them hope? And do you have a favorite place? Or a favorite world that you go? Yes, sir. Sorry? Or your prayer with God? Yeah, that's right. And do you find the natural world helps at all in that respect? Not necessarily. Right, yeah, okay, good, thank you. Yes, sir.
I think anywhere that seems untouched by humans is helpful in rejuvenating the spirit.
Yeah. Do you find any area that kind of is untouched by humans in a kind of industrial sense or roads?
Yeah, or if I can imagine that nobody has been on my footsteps for a really, really long time.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe never.
Right, yeah. Do you find yourself going to those places, or is it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I must say, for myself too, I know growing up in Newfoundland, where there's probably more caribou and moose than there are people, but there's something about that. And living on the ocean, just the horizon, that sense of space as well. I think it's really important for myself. Water, yeah. You know what it is about it?
It's alive.
Yeah.
It's sparkling with light. Feeling calm and water.
Yeah.
It reflects at night. It will reflect on a very calm night. All the stars. It's just beautiful.
Certainly for myself, water, growing up in the edge of the North Atlantic, I find that if I'm too far inland, well, I am now in Sudbury, but there's something I miss about if I need to come here to Lake Huron waters. There's something about the horizon and the expanse of water too. It's really important. So often we take these things for granted, and yet they define our spirituality in many ways too. I know a lot of people in Newfoundland are fishers in the ocean. They won't be able to articulate often what they experience, but there's something about being on the water, seeing the land from the outside in. There's something that's quite special for them as well. Okay. I think I'm just going to spend just a few little minutes here, just in the Christian tradition. If I could look at we talk of the Trinity and how that could be of help. And it's used quite a lot in Laudato Si. How the Trinity is presented: God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, and we never think of it in ecological terms. We believe in God, the Father, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. We believe in Jesus Christ, in and through whom all things were made, and we believe in the Holy Spirit, the giver of life. And so we've been saying these words for over 2,000 years. And yet now, in kind of the ecological age, these words take on a whole different meaning that they never had. And well, maybe they did in some way, but there's something about them that's really, really special today. There's something about faith and religion and ecology that people often think they don't go together. When I was doing my research for my studies, I did it in Western Newfoundland, studying the forests in Western Newfoundland, and I would spend often a lot of time in the woods, my field work. And I'd come back, I was at the cathedral parish, and I would come back, not shaven, just come back after a couple of weeks in the field. And I was often mistaken for the gardener. Of course, it was someone else. And but people would say to me, what's a priest like you doing in the woods? Shouldn't you be in the church? Where you rightly belong. Because there's a notion that faith, and certainly belief in the Trinity, in the Christian tradition, has no relationship with the natural world. There was a poll done in Vancouver in British Columbia a few years ago that those who cared most for the environment, for creation, were defined as the following. They were middle-class women of European ethnic background who didn't go to church. So those were the people in Vancouver and BC who cared the most for the natural world. I'm sure here nobody fits that description anyway, so most don't. But so there's something about faith and our care for the environment that often don't seem to go together. So why worry about the earth when we're all trying to get into heaven, so to speak? Why worry about this valley of tears when it's the whole other world we see? And yet that's a real heresy in the Christian tradition. It's somehow like Adam and Eve and the Noah's Ark and the Garden of Eden. We're somehow all coming together. We're all created together and somehow have final meaning together. So we do need to kind of bring along the rest of the world, so to speak. I'd just like to just talk about just a word on each one. Even just the notion of, many of us call ourselves Christian, and we say, I believe in Jesus Christ, in whom all things were made. Like, what does this mean? This was kind of formulated about 2,000 years ago. And yet, today it seems to have even greater meaning than it did before. There's something about Jesus Christ. We say Jesus Christ, it becomes God. He's God incarnate. God infleshed. And we all know the word carnis, right? Latin for meat. Chili con carne, carnival, carnivorous. I come from the province of Newfoundland, Labrador. The provincial flower is a carnivorous plant. It eats insects, right? The pitcher plant, it eats food. So there's something about that. God becomes incarnate in and through the body of Jesus Christ. And so the only way to know God is somehow through the material world. Matter really matters for Christianity. And when I did my theology studies over the years, with every course I took, I asked the question, does matter really matter to us? Does matter really matter? And in the end I had to say, yes, it really does. Because we believe in a God that somehow is only manifested in and through the created world. So the blood that runs through the veins, ran through the veins of Jesus Christ, the veins and arteries of Christ, all of his elements in his body, all of it came from the great expansion of the universe and explosion of stars, and he was somehow involved in the whole evolutionary process as well, as we all are. And so that becomes, he's God incarnate, and yet somehow taken up in all the processes of nature. So there's something quite beautiful about that notion. And we've always talked of God as creator. I believe in God, creator of all that is seen and unseen. So our first intuition, at least the humanity's intuition about the great, however we want to call God, for many people it can be a four-letter word, but there's something about this mystery of the universe. And we immediately had this intuition that God is somehow one who creates, who gives life. When I was a young boy, I used to write a lot of letters, and I kind of still do, but on my return address, on each envelope that I wrote, I used to say, John McCarthy, 23 Blossom Avenue, Mount Pearl, Newfoundland, Canada, Northern Hemisphere, Earth, Solar System, Milky Way, Universe, Infinity. Did I get it all right? That was my return address. I'm sure I drove the post office crazy. But I had this amazing sense that the world was a big world. It was a big world up there. I don't know if you'd spend time in the summer to look at the Milky Way. This band of bright stars in the sky. That's our galaxy. Apparently it's 150,000 light years in diameter. What's a light year? It's the distance that light will travel in 1 year. Anybody got a calculator? But light travels apparently at 300,000 kilometers a second. Times 60 seconds per minute. Times 60 minutes per hour. Times 24 hours per day. Times 365 days a year. Except in a leap year, which is this year. And so that gives us 10 trillion. I worked it out. You have to trust me. 10 trillion kilometers. So light travels in 1 year 10 trillion kilometers, And so 150,000 light years. If I travel at the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers a second, is that right? 300,000 kilometers a second? It would take me 150,000 years to get across our galaxy. The Milky Way. And that's one galaxy of billions of galaxies in the universe with billions and billions of stars. So there's an amazing sense, is what astronomy has given us today. And Darwin has shown us that we're quite intimately related to everything on the planet. Earth has a history, humans have a history, life has a history, as does the entire universe. And so we say, I believe in God, creator of all that is seen and unseen. We're including all that somehow. And finally, we say, in the Creator, we say every Sunday, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life. Now, often we may think life, maybe that's just spiritual life. It is that, but it's also life. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life. And there's something about the mystery, the givenness of life. And the intuition, I think, in Christianity and all the faith traditions, Judaism, Islam, traditional spiritualities, is life. Life is the key. And there's a thrust in all these traditions toward life. And the Holy Spirit then becomes the giver of life. So somehow, in this whole evolutionary process, where the universe is still evolving and where creatures are being formed anew, some creatures are going extinct, there's an amazing thrust of life for the entire universe. And so maybe we can say the Holy Spirit is somehow intimated in all that. So God the Father, Creator, Jesus Christ, incarnate, enfleshed, and the Holy Spirit, the giver of life. And so the Trinity, it's kind of a weird notion, huh? 3 times 1 is 1. It took us 300, 400 years to get some handle on the Trinity. Figure out how do we understand, in human words, what we think has been given to us, revealed to us. That God is fully triune in some sense. And what I really like finally about that Trinity notion is that everything is in relationship. We talk about the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. So if all of creation is somehow Trinitarian, imbued with the Spirit of God, rooted in Christ, created by God the Father, in a theological sense, that all of creation is Trinitarian. In other words, it's in relationship one with the other. And science is helping us to see that more and more, that creation is relationality somehow. And so this notion of Trinity, every Sunday here in this church, you say the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, and yet we really think about it, what's happening, what we're really saying about the created world, about the natural world. It's really quite profound, quite energizing in many ways. And so the little lichen that was named after me, McCarthy S.J, we've only found it in one place in the world so far. Maybe we'll find this in one place. Most species are rare, and this one is particularly rare, probably. There's about 2 to 10 million creatures. We've named maybe 2 million. We put a name, probably 2. We don't know how many creatures are on the planet. And so something about where does all this life come from? Does it matter that things go extinct? Maybe they don't. I don't know. The dinosaurs gone extinct and new creatures came out of it, like the mammals. But yet there's something about the way we can exert pressure on the world so that we destroy creatures before we even have a chance to put a name to them. So there's a kind of lament in many ways. That the WC is really asking for, the Pope is asking for, can we have a language that goes to the depth of things? That's why I like the iceberg image. We talk at this 10% level, the surface 10%, but there's a whole 90% of life and reality that we never really talk about. We do it in many ways, in our prayer groups, sometimes at Mass, we do it in our own prayer, maybe in our private conversation with people. But in the public discourse, if you think of any newspaper, any kind of business meeting, any government discourse of any minister or prime minister or president, they don't talk about this 90% at all. And I think that's a real kind of problem in many ways for us. So that's why I think the religious language, we don't need to call it religious language, just call it language of depth, or language of the spirit, or language of the heart, whatever you want to, or language of love. But there's a language that kind of gets us deeper into who we are and how we relate to the rest of the world. And I think religious language, maybe not the only one, but it's helpful. It has the power to deal with sacred things. When things are sacred, we handle them with care and respect. And I think religious language enables us to go deep. Economic language can't do it. It's important, but it's not sufficient. Scientific language can't really do it. It can't go deep enough. Political language, I don't know if you watch the debates in the U.S. president election or any discourse. It just doesn't go deep enough. So the religious language and the Trinitarian language in particular can get. It's subversive because it really goes to a depth. I think that's because it never accepts the status quo on anything. It kind of really goes deep. And we think, as a final word, we believe that things are sacred. In other words, why are things sacred? Because they give us life. Anything that gives us life, that leads to love, that leads to community, is sacred. Water has to be sacred, because without it we die. You can live without food for a long time, but you can't live without water for very long. Breathable air has to be sacred, because without it, we die. A land that's vibrant, that's rich, that's fecund, that gives us food, that gives us life, has to be sacred, because without it, we die. And yet, when was the last time you heard the minister in any government, provincial, federal, municipal, talk about how the environment was sacred to us or to them? You won't hear it because they may feel it, and maybe in a private way they may talk about it, but in a public way, they're not able to talk about it because it's not acceptable. So maybe we do it in the church, so maybe we need to kind of bring it out into the wider public sphere as well. So there's something about this sacred religious language that's key, and Laudato Si really helps to do that. That's why we always depend on songwriters and poets and artists, because they get us to a depth, they get us to a different kind of language. So I'm gonna end there. Maybe as a final thing, the faith in Christ as Christians here at the Holy Cross Church. And there's something about the beauty of Christ with Blake Lebowski's Tree of Life. Christ is on a tree, his arms are spread wide, and he's surrounded by all the creatures of the world. And the arms of Christ are so wide that they embrace the entire creation. And so when we profess the creed each Sunday, we profess a belief in the sacredness of all life and of all creation. And so may that be our prayer always, that the next time we pray, I believe in God the Father, I believe in Christ, I believe in the Spirit of life. We will indeed embrace the fullness of creation. And maybe by those very words, we will then begin to action on behalf of creation, whether we serve Wiikwemkoong, Manitoulin Island, the whole lakes, Great Lakes, whatever it may be. So thank you for your attention, for coming out tonight, and coming from a distance for some of you, I'm sure. And I really appreciate you being here.
Jimmy Wedge, thanking the community members coming by this evening, and friends of Manitoulin, this beautiful Minado missing land that we share together, that we enjoy, and really brings to light that we need to love the earth more. And the video was so vivid, and to see that young girl, like even to hear, and putting her head down to the earth, to hear the earth, and to see the beauty of it, and all the animals that we share the earth with. So we wish for the message, and that's what I kind of got out of it, is the love that we see every day, every time we step outside, and the beautiful sunsets that we see, the clouds that we see, and there's always messages out there. We just have to be open to the messages that the earth is telling us through our God. Yeah. So we have a gift for Father John. Yeah. You can open it. It was a little hard for me to put it in there. Yes. And see, we like to reuse, right? And you can reuse this bag too. No, that is maple syrup. Yes, which was harvested in this community last year. Yeah, so there's 2 jars in there. Yeah. You know what we call that? What do you call that? Besides maple syrup? Nothing? We call it liquid gold. Yes.